Hello and welcome to episode number 46 of Behind the Impact. I'm your host, Jeremy Brown. In this episode, Josh Penny, the former director of social impact at Hinge, joins the show. The very first episode of Behind the Impact for 2026, and I can't think of a better person to chat with to kick off the year. Josh, welcome to Behind the Impact.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's good to be here.
We have a lot to chat about, especially with how things are unfolding with the corporate impact profession and the sector. But what I want to do before we get into that is learn more about you and your background and how you got into social impact. Can you give me that kind of career journey?
Sure. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta's home. I'm a country boy at heart. I have been working in the social impact world my entire career. I think I organized my first protest when I was like 16, and like that sort of like carried on. After college, I started working in education on the nonprofit side. And then about 8, 9 years ago, I had the chance to transition over to corporate social impact. And I started working for a company called Mailchimp headquartered here in Atlanta. And at the time I joined, it was like a couple hundred people, was growing in that scale up phase, and they had this really incredible corporate citizenship team that was just so well known in the Atlanta community. And I got a chance to join and spent the next 5 years of my career there, rose through the ranks, and eventually became director of corporate citizenship. And we led a lot of programs. A lot of that work was place based in Atlanta, focused on arts and culture and small business. And Mailchimp is a small business brand. And some of the like strategic work we were doing in the business was about uh, like positioning Mailchimp in the community and to prospective employees who we were trying to convince to move to Atlanta. Um, Mailchimp got acquired by Intuit in 2021. I saw that as a great opportunity to figure out what was next for me, and joined Hinge, the dating app, in 2022, where I was brought on to build out social impact from scratch. I was hired by the CMO at the time, Jackie Jantos, who really saw social impact as a core part of her thesis of how Hinge was going to reach Gen Z after being a millennial dating brand for so long. And I left Hinge last spring, last summer, to take some time off, and here I am now.
We have to go back to you organizing a protest as a teenager. Talk to me a little bit about that because that is unusual for a teenager to be doing.
Oh yeah, okay. It was an unusual situation. So I was like a straight A student. I was super involved in extracurriculars. And so I had been looking at colleges for since I was a freshman. There was like this weird little YouTube series I used to watch that like did campus visits, and I used to watch all the time. And so my junior year, my school district lost its accreditation. And this was a 53,000 student school district in metro Atlanta, Clayton County, just south of the city where the airport is. And there was the main reason was like activities, just like mismanagement by the school board. And so I organized a group of students to uh, represent the student voice at some of the big meetings that were happening, school board meetings, but also like eventually the governor stepped in, and it was like I learned so much about um, uh, bringing forth like your voice in a moment uh, of crisis. It felt like a crisis, because I was so terrified that I wasn't going to get into college. I wasn't going to get to go, because many schools just didn't accept unaccredited diplomas. So that's where, yeah, it was an interesting time. interesting time.
And do you think when it comes to your passion for social impact, was that the moment when that passion basically was released?
Yeah, yes, it had been incubating before. I remember, so like even when I was a kid, I had all of these touch points with nonprofits, right? Um, I went to in high school. I did this amazing program called 21st Century Leaders, still around today here in Atlanta. I went to accounting camp, which was like, some like corporate responsibility program from like I think it was like SunTrust when SunTrust was still a bank. Um, but also, I went to when I was even younger than that. Uh, when I was like 11, my dad got a call from the New York Times, from a New York Times reporter, saying that they had found his father, who had been missing for like years. They had fallen out of contact. And this reporter was in like going to just like doing reporting on 9/11 and sort of the aftermath, and had gone to a funeral hosted by a nonprofit called Project Renewal up in New York City that served homeless people. And, you know, was like, where is this person's family? And that's how, like, set on a mission to like find my dad and figure out that. So I remember going to New York and meeting with all of these like nonprofit leaders who had known my grandfather, who I had never met before, and uh, they had all of these like pieces and mementos of his life, and were filling in the blanks, and it just impressed upon me like this role that nonprofits and the social sector can have on one's life. And so like that was sort of incubating all along, and then that accreditation situation and that protest sort of just like was like, cool, this is how I can actually like go from being someone who is served by these organizations to like, here's how I can have an impact too.
And at what point did going to the corporate sector make sense for you?
Yeah. There's so many different vantage points one can have when trying to create like improve the world. And I was really interested I had spent some time in education on the higher ed side, and wanted to do something different. Even though I was like only 4 years out of college, I had been working on like access to higher ed stuff all through college. And so it just felt like a arc was completing in my life. And on the corporate side, I think I was drawn to this work for the same reason a lot of people are drawn. It's like companies are growing so fast, there's this explosive growth, and there is this like expressed desire to have a bigger impact on the world. Could that be true? What does that look like? And is there a career for me in that? And so I went into that role with a lot of like questions. And like my boss at the time, Lane, he entertained a lot of my epiphanies that I was having about that work and its purpose when I would just pull him in to like a conference room and I'd be like, so what we're really doing is this. And then he'd be like, yeah, that's what the job is, Josh. And I just learned so much at Mailchimp, and that was just so formative for me.
And what were some of those other questions that you were asking and that you were curious about?
Yeah. I mean, this is where Mailchimp is where I first learned the connection between social impact and brand. And comms and that sort of like how you could do programs, initiatives that actually made a difference in the community and had measurable impact, and then how you talked about it. And so I signed up because I thought I was going to get to have this impact, and what I learned was like how to communicate, and how to talk about this work. And not in and Lane, my boss, we still catch up to this day. He's been such a great mentor for me. We he would tell me and point out at times where there were like where rhetoric would get ahead of what we were actually doing, and how to right size things and how to show your work. How to look at, like, when you report out on a social impact initiative, you show how you did it. You talk about what went into it. Just so, not only so that other people can take it and scale the story and scale that work without you having to scale it, but also because it builds trust, and like, it helps like executives at our company or executives at another company see the why behind certain decisions, and how we did things and how we added credibility and things like that.
Let's unpack that a little bit more because what you're touching on is the fact that social impact isn't just about giving money to nonprofits, for example. There's so much more that goes into this work. And I know many practitioners do believe that and have seen that. But when we look externally and people are who are not in this role are looking at, what corporate impact practitioners do, that's all they see is giving money away and things like that. Talk a little bit more about the connection between social impact and brand and what that looks like.
Yeah, I love this question because I think like we have this language, and we have this like language in other fields where it's like there are certain like archetypes for how social impact can exist in the world. And I always am big on like I've always been in this like brand archetype for social impact. I also think, ironically, it's a space right now that has come under a lot of criticism, and like you've seen people retreat from it a little bit. But I still think there's like so much value in it when it's matched with uh, integrated work. And so for social impact and brand, really it was like, I think when we started, like when I started at Mailchimp back in 2017, uh, it was this notion that you could express a company's values out in the world through your social impact work. Um, and any sort of like expression of who a company is and why they do things and who they serve is ultimately brand building work. Um, and so that was like a really, and when I was at MailChimp, that was like a very, my very simplistic understanding of that work. When I got to Hinge, I got to see how that could like, how you could drill down two or three more layers under that, and move from this like values-based place to thinking about brand also as like, um, you know, how do you position yourself in front of the audiences and the stakeholders that are critical to your success as a business? Um, and that's a lot of the work that I got to do at Hinge. You know, we thought about, I mentioned that we were making that change from like being a millennial dating app to being a Gen Z focused dating app. And social impact was sort of part of the hypothesis of how that happened. And so I got to learn just how this fit into brand work, and how where it could have a lot of power in telling stories that confirmed to consumers who they thought you were. And I think that's where it's important, is like, we're not, like, brand work is not about broadcasting who you are. It's about like aligning like who you are with how people see you. And it's much more delicate than shouting from the rooftops about it.
So that's brand from a business perspective. I'm curious if, through your work at Mailchimp and Hinge on the brand side, did any of that bleed over to your personal brand and how you approach uh, yourself in the workplace and how people perceive you and your work in the workplace?
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of like, I think many people in this field can relate to this, but you become a de facto like ambassador, or like one of the faces of the business. And it's odd because usually that is a responsibility that is reserved for executives. and it comes with a lot of like coaching and training and media prep and things like that about how to present yourself. I remember being at Mailchimp and um, being like 20, I think I was like 27, 28 at the time of the story. And like people were, I would show up to meetings with community members, CEOs of nonprofits, leaders of foundations, and they would be like, they would be shocked that they sent someone so junior to talk to them. And I just sort of had to like put on a good face of being like, no, no, I'm who you need to talk to. And then like I was because on funding decisions at the time, like I was the decision maker, and so you get used to like your personal brand like intersecting so much with the company's personal brand. I like I had this moment where I had these people I really admired and became friends with out in the community through that work at Mailchimp. And then once I left Mailchimp, I was like, man, are these people really my friends? Like, or was I just, like, and then like, of course, I found out, yes, many of them were, and like, have maintained those relationships. And you just put on a new hat, and you're on to the next thing. But it's like, I'm sure you get lots of people who have that same
Yes,
experience.
absolutely.
Yeah.
With your time at Mailchimp, I'm curious, what were some of the challenges that you experienced early on in your kind of social impact world, or sorry, your social impact career?
I think strategy and learning how to do strategy right and what that actually means is a what was a big challenge, and it's a challenge I'm really grateful looking back to have had, right? One of when I got to Mailchimp had sort of gotten to like 300, 400 people, but was privately held. And so there was no board and there were no investors to report to. And so my first year at Mailchimp, the company did its first strategic plan. At this point, company was like maybe like 12 years old, right? Had never had a strategic plan, right? I when I got there, there wasn't even like a travel policy. They added that like maybe the first or second year I was there, about like how much you could spend on a hotel, right? And like it was classic like startup mentality without the pressures of like a board or an expectation of from investors to like have an exit. And so I think like that meant that the bar for strategy and what counted as strategy was really low. There was like no there was like very little overlap in the company strategy where we could like easily tie our work. The first place that we saw that actually became when our execs and Mailchimp executives, they were incredible. Like this is just the where we were, right? And actually, I think the more time you spend in any corporate environment, you see that like uh, a lot of times people they bring a lot of expertise and they're also just like trying to make it work as it goes, right? And so but the first sort of strategic area that we saw that we could tie into was the people strategy. Mailchimp needed to scale up uh, to reach its strategic plan, but we weren't in the Bay Area or New York. We were in Atlanta, not known as a tech hub at the time. And so, how do you convince people to uproot their lives, and engineers, product managers who um, are like, there are so many opportunities for them in the Bay Area or New York. How do you convince them to come to Atlanta? And our corporate citizenship work became a big part of that strategy, where and a big part of the employer brand. Like I used to go and talk to every class of onboarded employees. They would like regularly pull me in to do culture interviews with like random teams that I had never worked with before, you know. And so that was like the first place like I first place I saw this challenge with strategy, And then like so many more of my experiences have been like getting really good at that strategy piece.
So, strategy at Mailchimp, strategy at Hinge, you've learned a lot about strategy and putting a strategy together. If you were to give advice to another practitioner, more specifically somebody who might be a little bit more junior, and they're trying to wrap their head around how do I even create a strategy for social impact in a corporate sector, what advice would you give that person in terms of where to start?
Yeah, I love this. So I think you should start by looking and examining where the big problems or opportunities that are like 5 years down the road for the company. And this is really hard because oftentimes people in corporate impact roles they're handed a very vague mandate. Um, you're either brought in to build out social impact for the first time, like I was at Hinge. Maybe you are inheriting a leadership role, or maybe you're at the manager level and your team leader recently left, and they didn't backfill them, and now there's this like loose expectation of ROI and you got to figure out what to do. I think like when you're at the manager level, director level, you become an expert at program strategy. How do you like actually deliver on the social outcomes that you have outlined? But uh, like the challenge is like how do you connect this to the company strategy? Um, and how do you do that if you don't have visibility into 5 year problems and 10 year problems? Because most times the way strategy cascades through an organization is that you see the top level company strategic plans. There might be some pillars, and then your boss might understand how it ties in to that. There might be OKRs. It's much easier to do that and to see the through line when you are a on the product team because you need to know what to build, or if you are on the marketing team because you need to know what audiences and customer segments you need to build relationships with. But on the impact, very rarely are they putting the 5 year and 10 year problems or opportunities on that strategy. And so you have to like figure out how you build relationships with the leaders in the company who do have that view. And that's almost always the VPs and the executives. And um, they will be in those rooms. And then it's a matter of like listening and understanding what they see. They will tell you problems that probably aren't worth you solving, right? And so then it becomes a question of like prioritization, like what is the long-term problem that long-term social impact work can address, meaningfully address for the company. And so for at Hinge, for instance, one of the things that we were looking at is like, how do you there's all these people who have been turned off by dating apps, who have tried them and maybe like decided, oh, not for me, or who have never tried them. And all they do is maybe open up the New Yorker and like read these like terrible tales of dating, just dating culture in general, not even dating apps, and decide, no, that's not for me. And so we identified that as a long-term issue for the category. And we saw our social impact work as an opportunity to build relationships with consumers had uh, who had sworn off dating apps, and we could do that without asking them for anything in return. And so that social impact work focused on loneliness and social connection. We invested in a lot of social groups out in a couple different cities across the world, and helping to solve a problem that our audience had, a social problem that our audience had, without asking them to do anything for us. And so that's sort of how we got to that like 5 year, 10 year problem. And trickled it all the way down to what we were executing, uh, at the current time.
And that strategy at Hinge, talk to me a little bit more about the impact it had on the business in terms of its goals.
Yeah. So, I mean, at Hinge, it was really interesting because uh, one of the things that you know a lot of dating had the frame of loneliness actually helped us understand the pain points that our customers were having more generally. And so I remember looking at just some like customer research and seeing all of these things that they would tell us. Um, Anxiety about reaching out to people, feeling like you have to really put yourself out there and sell yourself, right, on a dating app, wanting IRL spaces, but also like wanting to move from the app to like an actual date. Um, and that's how I started looking at that. I'm like, wow, this actually sounds like a lot of the issues that you see in the research around loneliness. Um, and maybe there's overlap in some of the solutions. And so that helped us like clarify uh, some of our like some aspects of our brand and our messaging. Um, it also helped. There's also some more like functional things like you know companies today uh, they need uh, executives and like employees are increasingly the voices that consumers want to hear from. Very rarely, like, are people engaging with the company Instagram page or the LinkedIn page, but will highly engage with an executive, someone whose face you can see. And so our social impact work created a lot of like thought leadership opportunities. I think you'll see that, if you search Hinge loneliness, you'll see a lot of Hinge's executives out there talking about that work. And so that was like profile building. It like, established the company as like credible in a category that was like, you know, taking a lot of flack. It was a category. Dating apps are interesting because they were like sort of like a novel invention, and then they became businesses. And then once they got large enough, there were all these like expectations of responsibility placed on them. You automatically, all of a sudden, you have a whole generation of young people who are learning how to date on dating apps. And so I think society's expectations for the category were growing, and our social impact work helped us sort of like meet that.
You mentioned customer research and some of the findings that you came across while you were doing that research. Take me back to that moment where you were looking at the research and some of the insights started jumping out at you. How did you go about communicating your findings and what you felt was the right path with other stakeholders within the company?
Right. So I'm a big believer in like hypotheses, right? Like good old fashioned scientific method. And first, like I the most important thing to do is to like frame the problem, right? And if like I feel like that's like 75% of the work, right? What we were seeing, and I think uh what we were what we ultimately the what we ultimately came to understand is that there was like a trust opportunity in the category, and the customer research uh, was like pointing to that, but it wasn't saying that explicitly, right? And we had to sort of like pull all the threads together and like piece it and synthesize it and see like, okay, this is really the opportunity that the companies that will be best positioned in the next 5, 10 years in this category will be ones that solve category problems, rather than just like try and tweak features or like, you know, things like that. Uh, it's interesting work because um, you have to all align on what the problem is. And if you don't do that, then you're not really going to have the buy-in later on when you want to report about results and things like that. And so that was like critical. And my our CMO, who I was reporting to at the time, she like helped me sell the problem and like frame it for people, and took it into rooms that I couldn't get into, and or bring me into rooms that I normally wouldn't have had access to.
What did you learn about framing problems from your CMO, your past CMO?
Yeah. So she was really big on uh like she was known for asking lots of questions, and she she taught me how to like interrogate problems, and then to understand like whose voice and whose perspective to prioritize in the framing. And a lot of people and a lot of companies talk about like being like customer obsessed. Um, um, Sometimes in practice, what that looks like is like me as a employee, as a product manager, as someone removed from the customer, is obsessed with the customer's problem. But really, it's like, how do you start getting the customer to or the consumer to start articulating things in their own way, without sort of like leading them or guiding them to it? And so we worked with, um, one of the things I did was I commissioned research and market research, actually. And that's not something I had gotten to do in my previous job at Mailchimp or anything like that. But I hired this firm called DCDX, which was like a bit of a conventional choice, because this was a startup research firm that was about Gen Z consumer trends, run by a Gen Z founder, and the whole team was Gen Z. And they were able to help us frame the problems in ways, in language that Gen Z uses. And we use that as the starting point, rather than this is our mission, this is our vision, this is our company strategy, and like trying to reach the consumer from our own end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is you instead of talking about your mission, your product, etc., you started from the customer's perspective and basically like reverse engineered.
Yeah. Yeah, we reversed, and it was fascinating because even the methods that we used to collect that research, um, you know, would they pass the test for like an academic study? No, but did they give us what we needed? 100%, right? Like they would have DM conversations with people on Instagram. They're like, okay, at 2 p.m. on Friday, you're gonna have an hour-long conversation with us on Instagram, just DMing. One point we were really interested in how do you get people to make plans to connect in person, and we dropped a bunch of 22 to 27-year-olds in a group chat and watched them make plans together. And so like there were like these really, we wouldn't have done those methods if we hadn't worked with DCDX and gone to Gen Z to like let them frame the problem, and also like choose the methods. 100%. Yeah.
Something I want to go back to is executive buy-in. Zooming out a bit and just taking into account your entire career at Mailchimp and at Hinge, what are some of the lessons you learned about getting executive buy-in? And that can also extend to employee buy-in as well.
Yeah. I think, you know, corporate impact practitioners are really in an interesting place in the org, because we're sort of like, uh, I don't want to say outsiders is not the right word, but the people that we spend the most time with externally speak a entirely different language than our executives. Then when you go to the product team or to the marketing team, those teams speak a different language, and you almost have to become like a what's the word, a polyglot? Is that the word? Am I making that up? polyglot, and be able to speak all of these different languages, and not just speak them, but translate between them at the drop of a dime. And it's not just like the language; it's like seeing what does this executive, like this finance executive, for instance, what do they care about? Uh, and or this product leader, what do they care about? And it's pretty, once you can understand that, then you can start to talk about your work, talk about what you're trying to do in their terms. And I think a lot of people struggle with this when making the jump from like manager to like director, or like, because there's like this like purity of like, the work that we're doing is good and you should just want to buy into it because it's good. And it's like, it's not enough, because people are operating from different like not value systems, but like incentives, and maybe different values as well, and they have different languages. um and the art is like really being able to like surface what everyone is trying to work towards and what their ambition is, and like help them see their ambition in your work.
That purist mentality is something that I often see in practitioners who come from the nonprofit sector. They bring with them that purist mentality around giving back and making a difference, and it's the right thing to do, which it absolutely is, and 100% agree with all of that. But what they don't realize is the corporate sector is a totally different ballgame. And when you look at executives, their fiduciary responsibility is on growing the business. And so practitioners have to figure out how to kind of evolve their mentality. And this is why I enjoy talking to you. And it's something that I've noticed kind of through your career trajectory is that you've realized that you're in a corporate sector, and the way you approach the work has to evolve, and you have to be more strategic in terms of how you approach the work. And I know this is a conversation that you and I have had before in terms of what practitioners need to do to not only move the profession forward, but also make their own work stickier within their companies in terms of being more strategic. We'd love to get your thoughts on that concept of being more of a strategic operator, but obviously not losing that purist mentality.
Yeah. I think there's like uh this irony that uh oftentimes people in our field are really good at understanding power dynamics and systems and forces that like might shape how an intervention lands or works or doesn't. Um, but we have the added uh, um, opportunity, burden, whatever you want to call it, of like having to do that within an entirely different system. And so I think like you have to sort of like maturing in this field means like you have to take on this level of like pragmatism. And it's hard because when you look at uh, how companies talk about this work, it does feel idealistic. It does feel very pure. And I think we've done a disservice not just to like impact professionals, but also like consumers and community members who all they see is the only rhetoric they hear is the like purist rhetoric, like we're doing this to give back, we're doing this because we care, we're doing this because we want to change the world. And they don't get to see that actually this work is about balancing trade-offs, and like surfacing for your internal teams who uh, might not have any of this on their radar, the impact that some of this work that the core business can have on the world. And like we live in a world where like everything gets called harm, but like really like you can't move through the world as an individual without some sort of friction, right? And that doesn't mean necessarily that like you're hurting someone else, but like it just means that like if you have something, that means that someone else doesn't have it, or if you know, it's the same thing in the corporate world. And sometimes I think like uh the I think there's like there's been like a collapse of like we know about this institutional collapse of like trust or whatever. Everyone talks about that, but sometimes I think like one of the reasons that has happened so severely for the corporate impact sector is like we have gotten ahead of where the company actually is, and the rhetoric goes too far about what our aspirations are, and when in reality, like we can talk about good work and impactful work in ways that are true and honest, and like will still give you that like relationship building and trust building outcome that you're looking for. I feel like I'm rambling now, but like where I'm curious what you think, and like where like I'm gonna kick it back to you because I'm rambling, but go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, and again, you and I have chatted about this. The field is in a very weird place. And I am of the belief that in order to move things forward and to make this profession be sustainable and not just something that just happens every now and again, that, and I mentioned it a second ago, but practitioners need to become strategic operators. Like they need to understand, yes, the peer side of things and making a difference and helping nonprofits and supporting communities, but really figuring out how to integrate their work into core business. That and being able to drive that business value. Like to me, that is the direction that this profession needs to go in order to become stickier. Because right now, and you've probably experienced this at some points in your career, there's executives that look at corporate impact and all the different kind of disciplines under that umbrella and see everything as a cost center. Why are we doing this when it's not additive to the business? And obviously, you and I and every other practitioner, we know that it's additive to the business, but they don't know. And when times get tough, what's one of the first departments or disciplines that gets cut? Impact. And so, and this is coming from so many conversations I've had with practitioners over the years, that whole driving business value and approaching the work in a more strategic way, to me, that's the path forward.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think like one of the things that the people internally who ask like, is this just a cost center? Is this uh we I think we have to be honest with how much weight and power uh they've like had over our field, right? Where like we're in this space of justifying why we exist. Um and that's not like the most strategic place to be, and and sometimes I think that means we hide from conversations with people who might ask that, instead of like being proactive and then doing it head on. Like one of the things that I got to see at Hinge and be a part of was um, going to Hinge is owned by Match Group. And there's a Match Group CFO. And when he was there, I remember like having to go and have like regular meetings with him to walk him through this work. And he asked for the first meeting, but he didn't ask for all the subsequent meetings. And so like that's like the type of be on like the offense a little bit with like promoting this work. Even in times where we feel like you don't need to. Like when's the last time you've gotten to present at all hands and talk about like why this is important? What members of the executive teams has not touched this work in a while, and you need to touch base with them. I think d- we there's a lot of there are a lot of ways that we can defend this work and justify it without always being reactionary.
So, what I'm hearing is be proactive when it comes to talking to stakeholders. Beyond the CFO example that you gave, What are some other stakeholders that you had to regularly touch base with in order to get them to understand the work that you were doing?
Well, now that you asked that question, I might want to reframe my point a little bit because you want to touch base with the people who don't understand, but you really want to find the people who will champion your work. Um, and like I found that on the comms team. I found that on UX research at Hinge. At Mailchimp, that was the people team, the comms team, our two co-founders, right? And when you start to see the people who want to support and carry this work forward, and then you start helping them solve their problems and translating this work into business, um, uh, the very simple business equation of like uh, cost, profit, return, things like that, um, then those are going to be stronger advocates for you, and help you see opportunities to connect the dots. Um, and so, like, if there is truly a person in the org is who doesn't see that this work has value, I would not spend too much time trying to convince them unless that person is a CEO. Right? Instead, what I would do is I would just figure out who my allies are in this work um, and ask them to help me scale it, grow it, make it more impactful, to be critical of it, to ask me tough questions, so that it can like um, sort of pass the uh, you know you don't need people who are detractors to like always be on board. Sometimes you just need them not to detract.
That's fair. That's a good point. When it comes to champions, at whether it was Mailchimp or Hinge, was it pretty straightforward to identify those champions, or was it through the work that you did that the champions then started bubbling up because maybe they started kind of understanding what you were working on?
Yeah, this is a great question. I It's a little bit of both. I'll give you Mailchimp. Mailchimp has some clear examples of this for me. We had a chief people officer, Marty Wolf, who was like, she was all about this work. She cared about it. She saw how it uh, mattered to our employees, how it grew employee pride, all of those things. And then so she would like talk very forcefully about the importance of this. And then our we had a VP of engineering, Joe, who was really curious about how this work could help support some of his goals. One of which was like he has all these engineers who are trying to get promoted and move in the ranks. Mailchimp had a pretty clear like this is what you have to do to reach this senior and staff and things like this. Um, and one of the criteria was like you mentor, but there weren't enough opportunities for them to do that. And they needed like new talent pipelines, and so like he came to us and asked us to build like a program with a local university, that was like a pipeline program, and we did that at this university here called Clayton State, which you probably haven't heard of, but like that's why we chose them, right? They were long overlooked in Atlanta. That has like Georgia Tech and Emory and UGA an hour and a half away, and so we worked with Joe to build out this program that lasted like 5 or 6 years. And like brought all these like incredible interns and gave all of these like up and coming leaders in the company an opportunity to mentor and teach about their field. And so like that was a sort of like yeah, some people see it immediately and want to jump on board, and other people you have to show them the impact, and then they will help connect the dots in ways that you couldn't even imagine.
And when it comes to showing the impact, is it showing the impact as it relates to what they care about in their kind of day to day as a professional?
A little bit of both, right? Like, there's always like an opportunity to like expand people's minds. With one of the things that we did at Hinge was we started a fund called One More Hour, and we invested like $1 million. I think it's probably a couple million at this point of funds into like chess clubs, running groups, anything that got young people gathering in person. And at first we thought like, cool, well, relationship build, this is where like these spaces have a lot of like cultural cachet and like we'll be their friend. And then what we learned from just like being in conversation with them is that, oh, there was actually a lot to learn from these group leaders, people who had organized that that hiking group or whatever, about how you build connection and how you help people feel closer. So then our UX research team started talking to them and like pulling in their insights for like certain product features, right? And like it's like a flywheel of like or like a compounding of compounding opportunity. Like people just start to see it um and then they will like invite you in.
Let's shift gears a little bit and make some predictions. So we are 6 days into the new year. I would love to get a prediction from you in terms of how you see impact unfolding in 2026. Do you see anything different happening, or do you see, the same things happening this year?
Okay, so I think we'll see like a lot of move. I have two predictions. Like I think we'll see a lot of renewed interest in this work, um because people like you, Jeremy, are helping people see how do you actually integrate this into the business. You know, we're moving from this like world, I think. uh Corporate social impact and responsibility has like existed for a long time, much longer than people acknowledge. I mean, like uh Andrew Carnegie and the Rockefellers, like they were doing corporate philanthropy back in the early 19th century, right? um and we're in this moment now where I think like in the 2010s it got really focused on like expression, like impact as an expression of like who your values are. And now we're like seeing the limitations of that when the cultural conversation shifts, and companies want to express themselves in different ways, but this work still matters. And I think we'll see like now clearer examples of how this work drives business impact. And maybe what I would love to see are like a whole new suite of like corporate impact models. In the same way that like you might see like business models, like how like here's all the different ways that you could actually like earn a profit and things like that. I think we'll see models of corporate impact that are drawn from like real world examples. Maybe that's something you can do, Jeremy. No, this is homework. The other thing that's more tactical is like I think we will see um, a moment where a shift in like how we think about impact reports. Uh, I've had a very like strong stance that I nowhere I've worked have everywhere I've worked I've been like no impact reports because I was fortunate enough to work in places that didn't have a lot of uh, uh, reporting requirements. And even at Hinge, our parent company, we had a social impact team up there that did like the sustainability stuff. And so, because to me, it's like all of this great storytelling about the impact that your company is having, and it sort of just gets buried on an investor page that like no one reads. And people put so much time into it, and like but now where I'm realizing like times have changed and maybe my thinking was wrong, right? because LLMs and need like this sort of there's opportunity to like put this work in a format where like your ChatGPT or Claude, if you ask them about what is the impact that this company has had, is this a good company, will have this like, they need stuff to pull from. And I think what that means is it'll be less glossy. I think it'll be like very readable. And then what I hope is that people get more creative about how to communicate social impact work out in the world. We're in this moment where like in 2025, I feel like everyone was told to just sort of go quiet, and I think that that was like a pretty like understandable initial reaction, but I think it misunderstands what the problem was. It wasn't that I don't think the problem was that people were loud about impact. I think, as my grandma says, is that they were loud and wrong about it, right? Like, there's like when you can't when you're loud about what you're doing out in the world that's creating all this impact, but consumers can still see other parts of the business that don't align in your business practices, that's loud and wrong, and that's the thing that people are pushing back against. And I hope that people get into a space where they can be more strategic about how they're communicating with um, audiences and stakeholders about like this work, because the truth is a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people are just not aware of what your company is doing that's good in the world, and you may detest comms or marketing, but you need it as an impact professional. And I had so much value in my time in Hinge, like being embedded in the marketing team and learning like how to actually get things in front of people so that they see them. It's so hard, especially in this world, in this media environment, but it's like a skill that I hope that more strategic impact operators add to their toolbox.
Last question for you. What about your prediction for the next 5 to 7 years in terms of where the profession is going to be at that particular time? What's your prediction?
Okay, I'll do this if you do one too, because I'm curious how you would answer this. Um, I think we see the sort of next frontier in this space, and the problem that I think impact professionals are going to have to help their companies solve is like the impact of AI on labor. And you see so many companies rushing to like say like, oh, we actually don't need all these employees because AI can do it. I think you see a couple of very prominent examples of companies that have done that and are like, actually, we jumped the gun a little bit. I think though consumer attitudes are going to shift in the next 5 to 7 years, um, to really evaluate the impact that a company has on the world by how they treat humans, and like what's their stance on employing people and sharing like the wealth that they're creating, is going to be huge, I think. And companies that don't have you know, an answer to, for instance, like the entry level career ladder breaking down of how they're helping to like grow talent. I think it's going to be a missed opportunity. Um, and I think I think like, well, there's a lot of like skepticism amongst the general public about AI, even if they use ChatGPT on a daily basis, about what it means for them. And I think like companies are going to have to answer that question about like what this means for like their communities, and how they employ people and how they think about the roles that companies have historically played in people's lives.
Plus one to all that. If I had to predict where the profession is going to be in the next 5 to 7 years, I feel that we're still going to have some friction in the early days, where there's still going to be a disconnect between the work and the expectations from executives. But the optimist in me believes that practitioners will evolve and be able to articulate the value that they're having externally, but also more importantly, internally, being able to, going back to the whole integration piece, being able to integrate their work deeper into their businesses, being able to support other departments, whether that's HR, marketing, sales, whatever that might be. And we're going to see kind of the elevation of the corporate impact professional and the importance and value that they have internally. And so they will no longer be a fringe profession where everyone's like, what do you do? Do you just give money away? But an actual respected function that is critical to how businesses operate. That's the optimist in me. That's what I would love to believe, and I do feel like we can get to that point. You know, we have leaders like yourself that understand, to use a sports analogy, where the hockey puck is going. Right, you know exactly where it's going, and you're making moves to get to the point where you can meet where that hockey puck is going. I'm not a hockey player or by any sense. I don't know if that's a great analogy or not, but it makes sense in my mind. But I do believe that's where the profession is heading, and it's great to have conversations with like your again leaders like yourself and other practitioners that I've had over the last, I'd say, 6 months or so, where I'm beginning to believe that more and more practitioners are seeing the writing on the wall and understanding where they need to evolve to in order for their work to continue and the work as a whole to continue.
I agree, and I wonder if I think there are like some structural things about the ways that our field usually gathers that might be like we could change that could accelerate that, right? Like I've gotten to attend like some of the programming that you've done, and like you do a really good job of like centering the programming around like people's needs in these roles. But like almost every other space that I've been in around corporate social impact, that's not like a small group conversation. um we use it as like uh when we talk about like reporting out on our work, it really is like the most polished version of it. And we don't talk about often. Uh we don't have the space often to like reflect in public about what's working or not, because we see it as so risky for the company. And I would hope that like, instead of going to a big social impact conference and like only hearing the good, that like there are more smaller group settings, more conversations where people can really dive in to this stuff and like reflect on some of the big challenges, without having to worry that they're like, doing harm to their company by speaking uh, uh, like without assuredness or like questioning things or things like that.
Such a good point. Just more candid conversations without the fear of hurting your company. Absolutely. Josh, thank you so much for joining me and having the very first conversation on Behind the Impact for 2026. As I mentioned, you're a leader that I respect a lot and that I learn from. We've had several conversations dating back to last year, and I feel like I learn something new from you every time we have a conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with me.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy, and hope to like keep doing stuff together.
This episode is brought to you by Social Impact World, the intelligence layer for corporate impact. I'm Jeremy Brown. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Behind the Impact.